If you're playing the short game, which many times I see business owners do, they're looking at a marketing campaign or an advertising campaign or some sort of tactic or strategy they implement for a short period of time, but they don't see it through. They don't look at all the angles. They don't really uncover and really digest and get feedback around that initiative to make it better, and they stop too soon. And that short game mentality, I see it time and time again. It's detrimental to your success. So from a business perspective, if you really want to, make a mark on this planet, have an incredible business, have an incredible empire, you have to have the mentality that you're going to play the long game, that not every strategy from the very beginning is going to work, but you have to have the mental fortitude to realize, okay, this might not work, but when I come to a dead end here, I'm going to learn a lot in the process. I'm going to adjust. I'm going to pivot until I find a strategy that works.
Welcome to the Fitness CEO Podcast, a show dedicated to helping fitness entrepreneurs launch and grow successful gyms. Here's your host, Bryce Henson.
Hey friends, welcome back to another amazing episode of the Fitness CEO Podcast with yours truly, your host, Bryce Henson. And today I'm shooting a solo episode today and really excited and passionate to really share this message, which really the message that I want to share from a business perspective, from a life perspective, is the value of resiliency, of being relentless, of playing the long game, and really, when you break it down, having a whatever it takes mindset and mentality. And that's really the message that I want to share today to help you on your journey of entrepreneurship. And really to articulate that and to manifest that, I'm going to showcase and tell you a story of my life and really how I use some of these principles that have helped me, in particular, this particular story, but also have carried through just in my ethos and the way I operate from a business perspective. And typically when I'm presenting this, I show a picture of the world famous Cristiano Ronaldo, who is probably the most famous soccer player in the world. He's the most followed Instagram follower, over 500 million followers, which is wild. And he is the symbol of Portugal, and he played for the Portugal national team for the last 20 years. And similar, I'm actually a citizen of Portugal, so I have something in common with him. As you can see, this Portuguese passport, which I'm going to showcase and really storytell around it. Now, before I go any further there, if you are new in terms of this particular podcast, do know that I'm American through and through. I love me some America. And yes, just like any country in the world, we have our problems. And specifically the last couple of years have been really challenging with, the political tension and the racial tension, all the things that we're working through. So by no stretch of imagination is the U.S. perfect. However, from my lens, I am a true blue American guy. I'm very, very grateful this country that we have, the wealthiest country in the history of the planet all times. And for as many challenges we have a very, very fortunate situation, which I really want to express. And I think it's important to kind of lead with the heart and also to just reaffirm my allegiance to the United States. But more so than that, my core value personally, I would say, would be freedom. Freedom is a core value of mine. That's something I hold very near and dear. And while I have an American passport since I'm born and bred, there came an opportunity where I had the opportunity to acquire this Portuguese passport. And now you might be thinking, okay, what's the value in that? Well, if you're watching this, and hopefully you're a well-traveled American, but what I've learned in my 39 years on the planet, living in this beautiful country of ours, many times Americans aren't as well-traveled as we should be, especially for the wealth and the fact of our passport. We can travel to many countries in the world without a visa. And if you're not familiar with what a visa is basically a certificate of permission to come and enter the country. And having an American passport, we can travel a lot of places without a visa. Not all countries, especially the ones there's tension, etc. But that's very different than other parts of the world. An example, which I'll storytell a little bit. My wife is from Brazil, and her family's from there. And when you're Brazilian, pretty much the vast majority of countries in the world that you need to that you want to travel to, you need a visa. Different than the United States, you need clearance from that entering country. So the fact is, having a passport or multiple passports really is an opportunity. It's a passport to the world, if you will, no pun intended. But really, it is a freedom mechanism for you to have freedom and really options. Is really the name of the game, and that's really from a foundational reason why I pursued the opportunity as it it was presented to me to acquire my Portuguese passport. Now you might be thinking, okay, well, how did this story come to be? How did you acquire that? So I'm going to elaborate right now. First and foremost, if you're not familiar with my story or you're new to the podcast, I lived in Florianópolis, Brazil for 2 years from the years of 2010, 2012. I always wanted to learn another language, live in another country. And there was an episode previously where my co-host, Bedros, basically interviewed me. So I'd highly encourage you to check out that for the full story. But I lived in Brazil. I had an incredible experience, met my wife, learned another language fluently. Brazilian Portuguese is what they speak. And just had an incredible life eye-opening experience. And 2012, and then moving back to the States after I brought my bride-to-be with me, Tatiana. So that's really the foundation of me living in Brazil. But you might be asking, okay, well, yes, Brazil speaks Brazilian Portuguese, but what is your tie to Portugal? And really the analogy would be someone from South America moving and living in the United States for a couple of years and then acquiring an English or a British passport. So there's lineage there. The country was colonized, but they're two separate countries. So really to unpack that, and as I referenced my wife, Tatiana, she is born and bred in a little island in the very south of Brazil called Florianópolis. And her family, at least her immediate family, are all Brazilian. She comes from a very culturally Brazilian type of family. But about 100 years ago, at the dawn of the 1900s, her great-grandma moved from Lisbon, Portugal, to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Her great-grandma, that is, and she brought with her family, and aka Tatiana's grandma, who was 6 years old at the time. So her great-grandma, and then her grandma was also Portuguese from Portugal, but her grandma was 6 years old when she got to Brazil. So she looks, she sounds, she acts, and she talks Brazilian because she's 90 at the time of this recording. So she's lived in Brazil for 84 years, her first 6 years coming from Portugal. So in the reality of the situation, while technically she has a Portuguese passport and she was born in Portugal, realistically and culturally she's Brazilian. Same with her mom, and same with Tatiana and her siblings. Now, interestingly enough, in the country of Portugal, different than the United States, in this U.S., if you're born in the States, you are automatically by birth American. That is not the truth in Portugal. You can be born there, but not necessarily from Portugal. But even more so, and really an interesting situation, is if you can show lineage, aka through your immediate family, through your parents, that your parents are Portuguese, your passport or your citizenship can get passed down. So I shared the story about Tatiana's great grandma and then her grandma because they migrated to Brazil again over 100 years ago. Her grandma had her Portuguese passport. So fast forward to 2010 when I was meeting Tatiana and first lived in her beautiful island with her family and getting to know her, whatnot. Tatiana shared with me, I had no idea, so she shared the story, and she shared the update that her mom was in the process of basically applying for a citizenship in Portugal because her mom, which was Tatiana's grandma, was 6 years old when she came to Brazil, but technically has citizenship in Portugal. So because of the lineage aspect at play, Tatiana's mom could then apply for a Portuguese passport and then ultimately have a passport or a piece of freedom, if you will, to travel about, because especially, Tatiana's mom living in Brazil, if she wants to travel to the States with a Brazilian passport, she needs to go through all these hoops and pay for the visa and this big process, where if she has a Portuguese passport, because the United States and the European Union are a bit closer in terms of just their allegiance, if you will, she can arrive and stay in the States for a few months without any, complications or need for a visa. So again, going back to my core value, freedom, when you have a passport from a different country, it just gives you more options, which is really the name of the game. So upon learning this from Tatiana, I was like, oh, wow, that's great. And then seeing Tatiana's mom successfully, get her Portuguese passport, which again, she is a Brazilian through and through. Her mom, born and raised in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, as Brazilian as the day is long. But through a fortuitous situation from Tatiana's mom's and then ultimately grandma was able to secure her own Portuguese passport. So when this happened, it took a couple years, probably in the year about 2013, roughly, when it all came to fruition. I then turned to Tatiana and said, hey, babe, that's awesome. Your mom was able to get her Portuguese passport. And from what you're telling me about the lineage, that's super cool. I would highly encourage you. Have you ever looked into, or have you thought about, acquiring your own passport and citizenship in the country of Portugal? And she's like, no, I really haven't thought about it, but I think that's a good idea. So I put a strong recommendation, and she was all about it. So in 2013, she started her process. Again, from a lineage perspective, her mom was granted citizenship in the country of Portugal. So she put in her application to secure her citizenship and then ultimately get her Portuguese passport. And it took a few years, but roughly in about 2016, all the paperwork was cleared. And as it turns out, very successfully, Tatiana was able to secure her own Portuguese citizenship in her passport, which is really interesting and very ironic because Tatiana's been to the country of Portugal for one time for 4 days of her life, and I've been there twice for a period of 10 days. And ultimately, I was able to secure the Portuguese citizenship and passport for my wife, who's only been in country half the time. But that's a story for another day. So that all in mind, when all that transpired, then I got interested, which is really the strategy behind me inquiring about her Portuguese passport. And even before that, taking a step back, which I didn't really articulate in the beginning of the episode, so I wanted to make sure I do. Additionally, the value of gaining access to another country and citizenship and passport, you have more options. And to be very clear, kind of as I mentioned earlier, I did not give away my American citizenship. I wouldn't have done that if I needed, if that was a requirement. But I could certainly have both. And specifically, the power of a Portuguese passport. Yes, I'm very grateful for the country of Portugal for opening their arms to me. But in the grand scheme of things, the big value of the Portuguese passport specifically, because Portugal is a small country on the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, has 10 million roughly inhabitants. But being part of the European Union has access to 27 other countries in the European Union. And because of that union, if you're a citizen in Portugal, you can live and work in any of the other 27 countries just as if you were, a citizen of that country. So it's huge value there. So it's from a strategic perspective. Not only did I get access in Tatiana and her mom to the citizenship of Portugal, but really we got access to the list of 27 other countries in the European Union. And to give you an example, at someday, potentially, even though my wife Tatiana says I'll never retire, but if I decide to retire at one point and stop working, there could be a situation where I want to live or at least have a long-term vacation home in Spain or Greece. And by being a citizen of Portugal and having a passport, I can arrive to Europe and live in Greece and Spain just as if I was from Spain or Greece. So it's a very, very, attractive place. So that really gave me the foundation, the interest to then start the application process as a spouse of a Portuguese citizen to acquire my own citizenship. And as you would imagine, it's not an easy process. It's not an inexpensive process either. It takes some time. But really what I did in early 2016, I began that process and I arranged all my documents and I got the FBI and the security, clearance checks that you need to do when you ever provide all the paperwork to the embassy. It took me about, anywhere from 4 to 6 months to really put all this paperwork and application together. And then I shipped it off while I was living in California to the embassy in Lisbon, Portugal. And that took me a handful of months, as I just articulated. And it probably took me another handful of months to receive the response. And finally, one day, the official letter came in the mail and I was so excited to get it and, dug into it and I opened it and denied. And I thought to myself, my heart sunk. I was like, I don't understand. I basically put all this application in, what's going on? So I really looked at the application and they cited one specific area of emphasis where I needed to provide more information. And roughly speaking, there was about 10 different, items on the checklist for me as a spouse of a citizen of Portugal to be able to, be approved for my own citizenship in Portugal. Now, 9 of the 10 were very cut and dry, black and white, and I clearly met the criteria. I was married to a Portuguese citizen, and then there's a list of the other 8, totaling 9, that were very, very black and white. However, there was a 10th piece of criteria that was a little bit more gray. And it really, that 10th criteria is you have to show a cultural tie to the country of Portugal. So with that, I said, okay, I'm going to do some research, collaborate some resources and information, and then really put together a stronger application in my second go around. So I went through my Rolodex of pictures while we were in Europe and, got a bunch of pictures when Tatiana and I were visiting Lisbon and, other areas within Portugal. I was able to secure a letter from my Brazilian Portuguese teacher, articulating the fact that I was fluent, and a few other things to really kind of strengthen the cultural tie, that piece of the application. So it took me about a month or so to put everything together. And then true to form, basically shipped that back out to Lisbon, Portugal. And about a handful of months later, I'm waiting in anticipation. The day arrives, the letter comes in the mail, the official certification, and open it up and denied. And I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me. This is unbelievable. Very clean, black and white. I fit all these criteria, and I'm fluent in Portuguese. I lived in Brazil, which is a colony of Portugal. I have a Brazilian Portuguese teacher, a lot of connection, and I'm married to a citizen of Portugal. And I say citizen because she is a citizen. Now, granted, culturally, she's very Brazilian, and even I would dare to say more American now. She's lived in the States for 15 years. Not necessarily cultural Portuguese, but technically she's from Portugal. So I cited that to strengthen my application. And fortunately, I was denied. But again, from a business ownership perspective, from a life perspective, if you want to be successful in business and in life, you got to play the long game. You got to have resiliency. You got to have a relentless mindset. You have to have a mindset that you will do whatever it takes to win. And that's my mindset. And that's, kind of the thought process that went through my mind. I thought to myself, I didn't come this far just to come this far, because at this point it's 3 years in the making, tons of time, effort, and energy around this, thousands of dollars in application. But I thought, okay, you know what? There has to be a different approach and strategy. And as fortune would have it, I get a call from my brother Barrett, who has been linked on this episode. He's our executive director of coaching and profitability for the Fit Body Bootcamp brand. And he's also a big traveler as well. And him and his significant other, my sister-in-law Heather, wanted to do a Euro trip in 2019. So the time of this story, I started the application process roughly 2016. It's already 2019 in the spring. And he reached out to me. He's like, I want to get a Euro trip. And we're thinking of going to Spain, maybe France, and potentially even Portugal. And like a light bulb went off, my ears lit up. I said, you know what, Barrett, I would love to come. This is awesome. Let's go.
What's up, my friend? Bryce here. Now, you might know me as the co-host of this podcast and the CEO of Fit Body. But what many people don't know is that I actually began my journey as a Fit Body franchise owner. Now, being an owner, I wake up every day absolutely doing what I love. I live my passion. I help people transform their lives and have both financial and personal freedom. And it's for these reasons and many more that other owners join the brand and open their own Fit Body locations too. So if you're looking to build a highly profitable business, take charge of your life, and create an impact in your very own community, then opening a Fit Body gym might be a perfect fit for you. Now, to see if a territory is available in your area, as we have very limited spots due to our incredible growth, go ahead and visit our website at fbbcfranchise.com to complete an application. Well, thanks, and back to the show.
So we decided to kind of book the travel arrangements and ship off to a nice week and a half vacation, one part in Portugal, visiting Lisbon and then a city called Porto in the north, and then visiting one part of Spain, which is just on the other side of the Portuguese border. So we booked the travel. It was roughly about June 2019. And in the interim, after I just received my application being denied, I still reached out to the embassy pretty aggressively at this point because I thought, you know what, I'm going to arrive in Portugal, arrived at the embassy in Lisbon, and ideally get a meeting set up, an appointment set up prior. Unfortunately, throughout all my attempts, I emailed and called a handful of times, did not get any response. But again, that mindset, having the whatever it takes mentality, said, you know what, then I'm just going to show up unannounced and try to figure out and problem solve this, in person. And the trip took hold, arrived to Lisbon, met my brother and Heather. Great trip in the grand scheme of things. Absolutely amazing trip, actually. And after the day or so, the jet lag rolled off. And after seeing the sites in Portugal for the first day, ended up making a visit to the embassy. And I arrived to the embassy about 10 a.m. in the morning. And kid you not, I arrived and there's just people everywhere. It's like a freaking zoo. Kind of like the DMV as we have here in California, or the Secretary of State, whatever you call it, depending on your local jurisdiction. But typically government, agencies, it's a bit of a zoo. There's lack of organization. There's a lot of people. There's long lines. And this was no different. And I proceed to walk in, and the front wasn't even the front desk attendant. The person basically manning the front door said, oh, you know what? She greeted me and said, hey, I'm so sorry you can't come in today. We've officially closed. And I looked at my watch. It's like 10 a.m. in the morning, and I'm confused. I was like, well, I read on your website they open at 9 o'clock. And she's like, we do, but the line basically backs up for people who don't have an appointment well before the doors open. So by the time we really open the doors, it's really open for a half an hour. Everyone gets their ticket, and then we have to close the line because everyone who entered in will be waiting through the whole day. And kid you not, she was absolutely right. But what she did is she recommended, she's like, so today's we're closed. We can't help you, but why don't don't you come back tomorrow? And if you do come back tomorrow, though, I would highly recommend that you get here at 6 a.m., which is 3 hours before the embassy starts. So that way you can get in line, and that way you can have a fighting chance to actually be seen by the embassy. So I was a little leery, honestly, given that feedback, and a little frustrated, as you would imagine. But you know what? As I mentioned before, which I'll probably say a few times over in this podcast episode, I did not come this far only to come this far. So finish out the day doing some sightseeing. The next morning, get up, have a great workout. And 6 a.m., just as she recommended, I arrived to the embassy. And kid you not, she was completely right. There was a line about a quarter mile out the door wrapping around at 6 in the morning to basically be in line to grab a ticket when the doors open at 9 o'clock. I was pretty frustrated when I first saw there, although granted I had the expectation. But you know what? I was going to make a good situation out of a bad situation and practice my Portuguese in the process. And granted, I'm fluent in the language, but it's still a second language. I started learning in 2010. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to make some friends in the process. So I met some Brazilian people, which was a great experience. I met some African people who were applying for their citizenship because the country of Portugal colonized the world along with England and Spain. And there's 7 active countries in the world that speak Portuguese, and many of them are in Africa. So it was kind of a cool experience, as I was biding time. And then 9 o'clock arrives, the doors open, and thankfully I was able to get a ticket. So I grabbed my ticket. So I was excited. I was going to be seen soon. Unbeknownst to me at the time, it was going to be another 4 hours later by the time I actually got called after lunch. So there we go. 1 o'clock rolls through. And at this point, not only from all the work of the previous years, but I've literally been in line at this embassy for 7 hours and finally get called. And I'm excited. I have all my paperwork, and I'm going to deliver it. And I see the front desk or the attendant who calls me and present my application, explain the whole thing. I have all my documentation, and she reviews it and she looks at it. And after she does, she looks at the point number 10 and says, well, unfortunately, Bryce, there's just not enough information here to be able to present a cultural tie to Portugal. And I said, well, what do you mean here? I've put in the application for the last 3 years. I check all these boxes. I'm married to a Portuguese citizen. I say that in quotes. She's actually from Portugal, technically, even though not realistically, but from the law perspective, she is. So I present all this information. I lived in Brazil for 2 years, which is a Portuguese colony. I'm here speaking to you in your language of Portuguese. Now, granted, I sound more Brazilian than I do from Portugal, but yet I'm still preventing that cultural tie. And that was my passionate plea. Denied. So as you would imagine, I'm pretty frustrated at this point. So I kind of take a second back and I think, okay, what else can I do? So in a last plea, I asked to talk to her manager. And I said, I know I've been here for 7.5, going on 8 hours right now, but ultimately I haven't come this far to only come this far. I'm going to have I have a whatever it takes mentality, so I'm going to see this through. I would like to speak with the manager. Is there any way that you can put me in touch? And she was a little apprehensive, but she paused and said, okay. And as she goes in the back, and I kid you not, half an hour later, her manager comes back, and I'm literally sitting at the embassy for going on 9 hours now, and go through the exact same song and dance, present all of my information, the application, the 9-point checklist, all the cultural ties, and after going through that conversation, denied. But then she stops and she says, well, how about this? There's a creative idea. Do you own any assets or real estate? Because if you do in Portugal, then guess what? We can show that as a hard asset cultural tie. And I stopped and I turned back, and thankfully I actually read the website beforehand, knowing that in the country of Portugal, you have to be a citizen of Portugal unless you have an exorbitant amount of money, to the tune of millions and millions of dollars that you can invest in Portugal, which at the time I'm not willing to do that because my business here at Fit Body Bootcamp, which goes all my energy investment. But I turned to her and I said, well, miss, I've read on the website, though, I'm a little confused. You have to be a citizen of Portugal in order to buy assets like property and real estate. And she says, oh, yeah, you're right. We have a little strange laws here in Portugal. And I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me right now. So, as you would imagine, very flustered, but and very humbled, if you will. But in a last-ditch effort, I kind of thought to myself, and I turned and asked the question. I said, all right, miss, I completely get it. I'm extremely frustrated, but if you were in my situation, what would you do? Because I'm not just going to stop here. There has to be an opportunity here. I am so close to this, and I am qualified for this. I just need to be able to present that vision to the right person. So what would you do in my situation? And she stops and she turns and says, well, Bryce, which is probably the advice she gave me is probably true at most countries. But she said, here in Portugal, especially in complicated legal matters, if you hire an attorney, it will dramatically increase your probability for success. But unfortunately, this is all I can help you with today. A light bulb went on. I said, okay, so now's the time to go ahead and find out and do all the research I can to basically secure myself an immigration attorney. So at this point, it's nearly 5 p.m. I've literally been gone for nearly 12 hours by the time I get my Uber back and arrive at the Airbnb. My brother Barrett and Heather are like, what just happened? Like, where did you go? And I explained the situation. I said, hey, team, I have a little bit of a predicament. I know we're supposed to go to the city of Porto tomorrow, which is a city 3 hours north. Highly recommend it if you're ever in Portugal. A beautiful city. I actually like it even more so than Lisbon. Both cities are great, but Porto is definitely my favorite. But we were supposed to leave first thing on a train the next morning. I said, I have a little complication, but again, I did not come this far only to come this far. So I'm going to basically reach out and have to schedule an appointment with some sort of immigration attorney who's going to, connect with me tomorrow. So what I would recommend, you basically take the train right up to Porto per plan, and I'll just follow along later on tomorrow after late afternoon, arrive in the evening after I find an immigration attorney to help me. And true to form, I just went on a research binge. And over the next hour, I basically called about a dozen immigration attorneys in Portugal. All they had, I don't even think they had 12, but close to that. And finally, at my last effort, this guy picks up. And ironically enough, he was from Italy, but he lived in Portugal for a long period of time. And he represented an immigration attorney in Portugal that, upon hearing my explanation, thought he might be able to help me. And true to form, the next day at 8 o'clock, I show up. Barrett and Heather shoot off to Porto and talk and meet with this immigration attorney. He looks at all my paperwork and kind of sees all the application. He said, yeah, the system here in Portugal definitely is a little challenging at times. However, based off all this, I think we have a case, and I think I'll be able to help you. So ultimately, was able to sign an agreement, a contract, part ways with a few $1,000s, and then over a series of 18 months after I finished the trip, made it to Porto, had an incredible experience with Barrett and Heather, and then made it back to California. Over the period of 18 months after going back and forth and sending more money and sending more data, as you saw from the very beginning of the episode, this baby arrives, and very excited. And who knows, maybe I actually never take advantage of it. Maybe I never live in Spain or Greece. However, going back to the point, core value being freedom, and I have options, which is a great thing. And if I have an opportunity to take an opportunity that's going to open up a big door, as my brother says, Barrett, in coaching, when we're coaching our owners, that big doors swing on little hinges. This is a little hinge that opens a big door, so I choose to open that in the future. But regardless of whether that happens, bringing this back, I really wanted to showcase the message from a mindset perspective, from a business perspective, from a life perspective, that friends, if you're playing the short game, which many times I see business owners do, they're looking at a marketing campaign or an advertising campaign or some sort of tactic or strategy they implement for a short period of time, but they don't see it through. They don't look at all the angles. They don't really uncover and really digest and get feedback around that initiative to make it better, and they stop too soon. And that short game mentality, I see it time and time again. It's detrimental to your success. So from a business perspective, if you really want to, make a mark on this planet, have an incredible business, have an incredible empire, you have to have the mentality that you're going to play the long game, that not every strategy from the very beginning is going to work, but you have to have the mental fortitude to realize, okay, this might not work, but when I come to a dead end here, I'm going to learn a lot in the process, and then I'm going to adjust, I'm going to pivot until I find a strategy that works. And certainly the value of a franchise system is we've done that, and we continue to do that. We have an agile system, so we're always running tests, and we only present to the brand the tests that work, which is a huge value of partnering with a franchise. Shameless plug for Fit Body Bootcamp. But regardless, okay, whether you partner with a franchise or not, at the end of the day, life is tough. Business is war. That's the cold, hard truth of it. I wish it wasn't true, but it is. So if you really want to make this big impact, have an incredible legacy, and really grow your income through impact, okay, through the fitness industry or whatever business that you're in, you have to have the mentality that you have a whatever it takes mentality. Literally, whatever it takes from a resiliency perspective, from a relentless perspective. Business is war, and you need to have that mentality in order to be successful. And I hope by showcasing this story is just one story of many of a long list of tales of trials and tribulations and mistakes I've made and errors I've made and challenges I've made, but ultimately having that mindset that no matter what, I'm going to figure it out, and I have a whatever it take mentality to make sure that I'm successful, my organization's successful, my franchise partner's successful, my clients are successful, my coaches are successful, and that's really what I want to put a bow on today. You must have a whatever it takes mentality to win. So without further ado, hopefully you got a ton of value. I'm sure you did. Go ahead, give us a like, give us a subscribe on YouTube, write us an amazing review on iTunes, and better yet, share this episode with someone in need, so that way they can help sharpen their mindset. And with that, really appreciate you. We'll see you in the next episode.